So thank you so much for coming to the Windham County Democratic Party Senate Forum. I'm Leslie Goldman. I'm chair of the Rockingham Democratic Committee. One thing that arose out of the despair of November 2016 election was a media company called Crooked Media. It was started by senior members of the Obama administration, and the first podcast was called Pod Save America. Some of you are familiar with it, I'm sure. John Favreau, speechwriter for President Obama and one of the founders of Crooked Media, created a new podcast called The Wilderness. It's the story of the Democratic Party from its roots to the present, addressing the question of how did we get to this moment. The failure of the Democratic Party is evident in the loss of over 900 seats at all levels of government over the last 8 years. While listening to this podcast, I found myself very emotional at times, sometimes despairing, and other times inspired. I believe that together we can make our way out of this wilderness by sticking to our values, building community, and participating in our democracy. Tonight, we do just that at this Windham County Senate Forum. So thank you for coming and participating. I want to introduce Meta McGarvey, who will be our moderator.
Thank you, Estey. That was really lovely. I know some of us are going to check out those podcasts pretty fast. I also want to thank you for coming out on such a lovely summer evening when most of us would probably rather be sitting on the deck with a cold beer right now. But it is such an important election and such an important time to increase our participation in democracy. So thank you so much for such a great turnout. I first became involved in political campaigns at the age of 3 when my mother took me door to door campaigning for a Detroit City Council candidate member. My first involvement as an adult was in college in Chicago for Jimmy Carter's campaign. So kind of coming of age in Chicago where the motto was vote early and vote often. I think a lot of us probably wish that we could do that this time around, but I just wanted to put the thought in your mind that we could fulfill that aspiration by finding 5 people who didn't vote in the last election, helping them get registered, helping them get to the polls, helping them vote in advance of the election, whatever they need. So, I wanted to give you a quick reminder to silence your cell phones if you haven't already put it on mute. And I just want to give you a quick rundown of how the evening's going to unfold. So we are going to invite each of the 3 candidates to give an opening statement. They will have 3 minutes each. We have our timekeeper here, Matt Peak. You'll see him holding up a little sign. Yellow cues them that they have 20 seconds left. Red cues them that it's time to stop. We are then going to pause, and Leslie's going to start handing out now these index cards and pencils so that you can write your questions on them.
I just want to know there are.
Come on in.
Come on in. Yeah, maybe get some seats. Listen.
So you can keep an extra card and send up another question anytime that one occurs to you. We'll just fold it in. After your cards have come up, the first round of cards, Leslie's going to organize them into themes so we can give them the themes that most people name the most times first, right? So we'll try to hit the questions that are shared by the greatest number of people first. We'll just rotate the order of the candidates in terms of who goes first on the questions. They'll have 2 minutes maximum per candidate per question, so that means that we'll probably get through something like 6 or 7 questions total in the course of the evening. We're going to pause, try to remember to pause around 8:05 just to invite you to send up further questions if things have come up for you. And then somewhere around 8:20 or 8:30, we're going to give each candidate 3 minutes for a closing statement, and then we'll wrap up by 8:30 or 8:40. We'll have 20 minutes just to mingle and have refreshments and that sort of thing. You should come and go, obviously, anytime you need. If you need water, it's over there. And then we'll depart by 9 p.m. So one just point that's helpful, since we don't have a lot of time for the questions, is just we would recommend if you could please not clap after each candidate's response to any question. And like if you're wildly enthusiastic about what someone said, you can kind of twinkle your hands in the back there so that they see that you really love that answer. But could try to use as much time as we can to give them the opportunity to answer as many questions as we can. Anything I've forgotten?
No, sounds good.
Okay, so we're going to take 3 minutes now for each of you to have the opening statement. We're going to have Jeanette first, and then Becca, and then Wayne.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. So just a little bit about myself. I was born in rural Minnesota and grew up in a Democratic Farm Labor Party, the DFL. In 1972, we moved to Westminster West, where my husband and I built a house. Some of you probably know the house, but we ourselves built it up there. And then in 1982, 85, we moved right into the village of Putney. So we live smack dab in the village of Putney right now. I was involved in all the usual things that people are involved in with their school kids, with United Way, a lot of local organizations. But then I ran for the Putney Select Board. And when I ran for the Select Board, I wasn't a really important person at all. And I ran against somebody who was a pretty important person in the community. And lo and behold, I won. And it was a shock to me. And I realized then that anybody has the right to run and should take that opportunity to run. It's really important for participatory democracy. One of the things that the Putney Select Board taught me was that I love public policy. So in 2002, I ran for the Senate and have been there ever since. I'm not going to focus on any one issue that I think is important, because as Chief Justice Reiber, the Supreme Court Justice here in Vermont, said that he thinks that the foundations of our democracy are being undermined, and the two things that he thinks are contributing the most are dark money in politics and single issue politics. But if there is any one area that concerns me the most, it is the issue of the foundations of our democracy. When we were asked what committees we wanted to serve on when I first got elected, I had no idea. So Bill Doyle, and you've probably seen the Doyle surveys at town meeting, contacted me and said, would you please sign up for government operations, because you have municipal experience and this is really important. I was so pleased to be asked to sign up for a committee, so I did. And what I've learned there is that the very foundations of our democracy are the most important. We deal with elections, we deal with municipal issues, we deal with open and transparent government, and those are the issues that I think are the absolute most important for us to deal with. We can solve, if we solve other issues, that's good, but if not, if we don't solve the foundations of our democracy, we're sunk. Thank you.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Becca Balint. I live in Brattleboro with my spouse and 2 kids who attend school at Green Street School in Brattleboro. Before running for office, I was a teacher in public schools here in Windham County. I taught in 3 different public schools, mostly 7th and 8th grade. And one of the things that always happened at parent-teacher conferences is people would come and meet with me, and they'd say, I'm so glad that you want to teach 7th and 8th grade, because I can't stand being with my child right now. And I love middle schoolers. I love them. They are always so present in what they're doing as long as you are present with them. So after teaching, as I said, I ran for office, and I've been thinking a lot about how one of the most visible aspects of the job in the legislature is passing laws. Of course, we're working on crafting legislation that makes life better for Vermonters. And tonight, as we go on through this evening, you're going to hear about bills that we were successful in passing, bills that got held up in committee or failed on the floor, or bills that we did pass and the governor vetoed. And we'll talk more about that policy. But one of the things I want you to think about is a legislator is both a job. Being a legislator is both an expansive job, and it's a job that involves incremental connections. And so I was going back over the last few weeks and thinking about how in the last few weeks I've helped a constituent who is having problems with their tax bill and couldn't get an answer from the tax department. I helped another one who is desperately trying to get information about her grandkids that are in DCF custody. I talked to 2 constituents and was a conduit for them with the Attorney General's office because all of their possessions have been taken by a sham moving company. And I also met with a father from this community who lost his child to the opioid crisis. So the job that, every 2 years we come and we talk to you about the bills that we're working on in committee and the work that we're doing legislatively. But I want you to know that this other part of the job is something that is incredibly important, not just to our democracy, but to the people in our communities. They need to feel like they can pick up the phone or email someone and know that there's going to be someone on the other end that will give them a voice and help them navigate the system. I always approach my job with, what are we getting right? What are we not getting right? How can I personally do my job better? It's not an easy task, but I love my work. I've been very proud to serve you for the last 4 years, and I look forward to having a robust conversation tonight. Thank you for the invitation.
Hi, my name's Wayne Estey. I want to thank Meta and the Democratic Committee in town for hosting us. I've never run before. I've worked for the state of Connecticut for 35 years. I've written legislation. I'm a retired attorney. I taught college. I taught high school. I taught middle school. Not very much. I graduated on the GI Bill and became an economist, genuine economist. Who would have thought? I didn't come from much. My father was the famous Uncle Elmer in the family because he owned real property, 888 square feet on a 50 by 100 foot lot. We were not politically active as children. We were unconscious. The only thing I ever saw my father interested in was fluoride in the water. And that's because he lost all his teeth when he was 17. He grew up in Maine. He cared about that. I'm not collecting any funds. I'm not fundraising. I'm not accepting any PAC money, any out-of-state money. I'm spending as little money as I can on my own, so I'm very careful. Well, I expect to be very careful with your money. See what else I wrote here. Oh, I have visited every select board in the county that would have me. One person at a select board meeting came to me and says, "We haven't seen a senator in our town in 40 years. Now, I suspect they may only have 4 or 5 Democratic voters in that town, but they have 300, 400 people in that town, and even I plan on representing the ones who don't vote for me." I was in the Air Force. I was, of all things, a policeman, and at the time I weighed something like 119 pounds, but that didn't matter. I don't weigh 119 anymore. I'm an energy conservation expert. I was the energy conservation expert in Connecticut, and a public utilities expert. The public utilities expert. Of course, there was only 100 people in the agency, and makes me not humble, makes me scared that I was the best that they had. But I took my job seriously. Thank you all for coming and listening to me. Thank my competitors here for listening to me too. Thank you.
So we're going to pause just for a minute while you write any further questions that you have. You can just pass the question cards into the middle.
So this is number 1. Why don't you number the others there? Thank you.
Yes, so remember, you can hand in question cards. You can just hand them over to Matt anytime, and or up to Leslie, we'll hand it in. So I think what I'm going to do here is, so we have 4 questions that are related to energy. So I think I'll just read all 4 questions, and you can decide what aspect of it you want to address. So since Jeanette went first, I think, Wayne, I'll ask you to go first, Becca second, Jeanette third, And then next time, Becca, you'll go first. Does that work? Okay. And if I mangle anyone's handwriting, feel free to jump in and correct me. The 90-50 energy goal is far from being met. Our biggest challenge is transportation and thermal, I think. How do you see us addressing these areas? Second one, an economy that works for all, climate action. How do we combine these two concerns? Third, how will Vermont meet the comprehensive energy plan of achieving 90% of energy from renewable sources by 2050? Especially, who will be responsible for which parts and by what deadlines? And then the last one, would you support amendments to the current use laws to allow carbon credits as a permitted use? Okay, so I'll give you just a second to collect your thoughts, and when you're ready, Wayne, why don't you start us out 2 minutes? Matt will cue you.
This is like a softball question for me. I designed some of the first energy conservation programs that Connecticut ever had. My response.
Speak louder, please.
I designed some of the first conservation programs that Connecticut ever had. Cost-benefit analysis, payback, that kind of thing, and design the project management. And I remember working and having 3 people participate in the Good Sense attic insulation program. Out of 1 million customers, 3 took advantage of it. The next year, 9 took advantage of it. And when I worked for the utility, I reported to them that there was a 300% improvement, and we got pats on the back. And that's when I went to work for the state, where when they suggested conservation programs by the utility, it was energy consuming programs. Let's get a rebate for central air conditioning and replace a room air conditioning with a to cool your own house. Their primary goal from the utilities is to increase energy consumption no matter what rebates they talk about. The state needs to provide energy conservation. Low cost, no cost energy conservation. Weather stripping pays for itself in months. Caulking pays for itself in less time. Pipe wrap, even less than that. And not renewables on mountaintops, because that is what Vermont sells to us. It is our wheel. We need to do conservation. This 90% by 2015 is all about the numerator. We need to be concerned about the denominator. How much total energy is consumed, not only by where it's produced.
Okay, we're at time.
Thank you.
Becca?
So one of the most exciting aspects of the budget that we finally got passed 6 weeks late was that there was a study that we were able to get into the Appropriations Committee and through the floor of both the House and the Senate, saying, let's take an honest look at whether we can do carbon pricing here in Vermont and do it in such a way that it doesn't impact rural Vermonters. I know that we have right now 2 very strong thrusts here in Windham County. We've got a lot of my friends in Brattleboro and the surrounding towns who are energy activists, and they're really concerned about our carbon footprint, not just in Vermont, but in the country as a whole. And those same people, when I sit down and talk to them and they want us to meet our goals for renewable energy, I say, we have to figure out how to have this conversation so people in rural areas that do not have adequate transportation, we all know it's a struggle, that it's very difficult to get along to work without a car in this state. So the commitment that we made in appropriations that we were going to do this study, we weren't just going to say that it was not possible to do, we were going to get the data and move forward on that. So that was a real win, because that's a conversation that we've been trying to have for several sessions in the legislature, and now we'll have the data to move forward on that. The other thing that I want to say is that we have also instituted a new program through the Treasurer's Office to invest more local dollars in weatherization. As we've talked about here numerous times, that we know transportation is a big issue for us in meeting our goals and weatherizing these old homes, both in Bellows Falls and in Brattleboro in particular. I also live in an older home. So I know we're not going to be able to crack that nut without weatherization. I see that my time is up, so I look forward to working with the rest of the legislature on this. That is very important to all of us.
So I'm not going to repeat anything that's already been said, but I would urge everybody to look up what's called the Essex Plan. The Essex Plan is the carbon study plan that Becca was talking about, and it will, I believe, put a tax on carbon emissions, but reduce it reduce the use, and will be done progressively so it won't impact low-income people. The question about who's responsible for, I think it was for carrying out the mission of getting to the 2050. And I think the legislature is responsible for setting the goals and defining them, but the administration is really responsible for implementing it. That's the way the government works. Legislature passes the laws, the administration implements them. So we need to have a really active Agency of Natural Resources and Department of Public Service, because they're the ones that are going to implement it. We also have to look at new, do we have a kitty in here?
Yeah, there's a mouse right
Oh.
now.
All right. Hello.
Where is it?
Just as long as he doesn't go up my pants. So I think we also have to look at new construction, and when we have new construction, we need to look at, instead of building box stores that have roofs that won't take solar panels, let's put solar panels, let's construct them so that they can take solar panels. Let's look at our parking lots and design them so that we can have roof panels on the tops of the parking lots to protect the cars and provide solar energy. So I guess my time is up, but I think we need to have a multi-pronged approach.
Thank you. So the next topic's education. We're going to have Becca go first, and then Jeanette, and then Wayne. So again, I'm just going to read these questions. Act 46, and I believe it's in local control of schools, so an interest in hearing you talk about that. Please address Act 46. Top-heavy government and schools. Some have observed that state agencies and schools are costing more because too many administrators, directors, assistant directors exist. Can we improve efficiency and lower costs by reducing highly paid top staff and giving more responsibility to folks doing the direct service? Also applies to schools. And then the last one, how can we best fund our public schools as student populations decrease in rural parts of Vermont? So again, give you a moment just to collect your thoughts, and when you're ready, Becca, please start us out.
So we could take several hours just talking about education, so I just want to acknowledge that. And as someone who has taught in the schools, I serve on the education committee in the Senate, and my children go to schools. I am immersed in this topic all the time. So I'm going to choose to focus on one aspect, but I know other things are also important to talk about. One of the things that we have to be thinking about is, yes, we do have, over the last 20 years, we have had declining enrollment. We know that. We've all seen it locally. And we have to think about not just how to do things differently because of declining enrollment, but regardless of what the enrollment is, what are we doing that actually is not working regardless of how many students are in there? And so I want to use this as an example of something that we're trying to save money for schools. And that is, we 2 sessions ago, we charged the administration with hiring an outside firm to do research on how we implement special education services. Okay. Vermont spends more money than most of the surrounding states on special education. We identify more students. Again, I could talk about this for hours. It's something I feel passionately about. And what we're not doing well is how we are delivering those services for kids. We also hire, on average, many more unlicensed professionals to deliver those services. We hire many more paraprofessionals. I see a lot of people shaking your heads. You know what I'm talking about. So one thing that we have realized is not only are we spending more money and we're identifying more students, we are not getting as good a result. And partly that's because of how we're funding special ed. Oh man, I knew that was going to happen. How we're funding special ed. So we're looking at implementing over the next 3 to 5 years a different funding source for schools so they have more flexibility in how they spend their dollars. It's not just on kids who have IEPs, but kids who may be in danger of being on IEPs. And that is my time.
Sorry. As Becca said, we could spend hours talking about this. And I have never served on the education committee, and I have never served on a local school board. So my knowledge of it comes kind of secondhand. But I think we do have to be more creative about the way we approach education. We, in the past, I think, have thought about it as a school building. That's the way we think about education. And I'm not sure that that's the best way that we should be thinking about education. We should be thinking about how are we going to best educate these kids in this century that we're living in, where people in 10 years, they're going to have to deal with things that we haven't even thought of yet. So is it the school building that we're talking about, or is it seeing to it that each child gets the education they need to prepare them to go out into the world? And I don't think education actually is just a preparation. It is actually it is the thing it is itself. It isn't just the preparation for adulthood. It is important in its own right. I'm committed to public education. I'm a product of public education. All my schools, colleges, everything have been public education. And my kids went to public schools. And we, over the past, I think, have begun to dilute our commitment to public education by acknowledging, and if there are those of you out there who are going to be offended by this, that might be, but I think we have done too much to acknowledge independent and private education. We have 273, I believe it is, independent schools in this state. And they all dilute, I believe, from our public education system. And that's where my heart is. And that's what I think we need to promote.
I am a big supporter of education. My father never got out of the 8th grade, and he couldn't have cared less whether I ever went to school. But education saved me. It's the reason I got to law school. It was important. I can't think of anything more important. The reason that we are having this discussion at all about Vermont schools is Governor Scott has decided that he will have no tax increases, no talk of tax increases. Now, if inflation is 2%, that means government services are going down by 2% every year. Where does the money for maintaining existing services, whether they're roads, whether they're opioid, whatever they're maintaining, whatever you're taking for granted now, they're going to decrease by 2% unless the money comes from somewhere he has decided it should come from public schools. That is short-sighted and wrong. First, the policy of dogmatically saying no new taxes. What if there's a hurricane? Oh, we had one. What if there's what if there's something else? Oh, no new taxes. We don't care. Just blind, simple talk. Very acceptable to Republicans, not very acceptable to Democrats. We have to be careful with our tax spending, but we cannot just say nothing. I was a board member on a private Montessori school. Sent my kids there because it was the best and least expensive child care available for them. A private school for 3-year-olds was the least expensive child care. Recently wrote about a Reformer article about this very subject. You should go read it.
Thank you. This kind of leads very nicely into the next topic, and I just want to say thank you to all of you in the audience for submitting so many of these questions, and I hope you're appreciating, I'm really appreciating being able to read like 4 or 5 cards on a topic, because I feel like it gets more of your voices into the room and into the conversation, even though they have to pick and choose what they're gonna address. But we may have some more open-ended time at the end. They'll certainly have a closing statement where they can come back to whatever they felt most needed to be further addressed. So the next topic is on democracy, the divide, and politics. So what can you do to bridge the divide? And let's see, we had you first last time, Becca, right? So we're going to go Jeanette, you're going to be first, and then Wayne, and then Becca. Please let us know some short-term and long-term ideas you have to get all money out of politics. Speaking of dark money, what are your thoughts on ethics in legislature? Campaign funding, influences of power money. What is the best way to support our democracy through our Vermont government? I'm not sure what this is. Something Governor Scott planning to building a new prison. Okay. A new for-profit prison. Yeah. Okay, so Jeanette, over to you.
Well, I'm going to leave the for-profit prison to, maybe there'll be a question on judiciary. But I think that we'll never get all the money out of politics, because whenever we have somebody running for a campaign, you have to do a brochure, you have to do a radio ad, you have to do something. So somebody has to pay for that. Now the answer is public funding for campaigns, for elections. But that means that the public then is going to pay for all of those candidates. And I think that we have we've looked at this a lot in government operations, because we do campaign finance. And we've looked at it a lot, and if every candidate in Vermont used public financing, it would be in the millions of dollars. So somehow we have to raise that money, and guess where we raise it? From the taxpayers. So the dark money is the money that is spent by what's called super PACs, and we don't really have a control over those. We can require that they declare their donors, but we can't tell them how much they can donate or how much they can spend. And that was a decision that came out of Citizens United, which we would love to get rid of. Ethics in legislation, in the legislature, I'm not exactly sure what that refers to, but we did pass an ethics law a few years ago. It took a long time. We have an ethics panel that's set up right now. Any citizen can call and file a complaint against any state employee, seated legislator, or administration official. And I'm happy to talk to whoever asked that question in more detail, and I'll talk about campaign finance till the cows come home if you want me to, but I guess not right now.
I come from the state of Connecticut. Our governor went to jail twice because he was a very slow learner. I worked for that governor. I saw corruption that would pale compared to what he actually got convicted for. It was sickening. I was on the ethics commission in the town where I raised my family. I take continuing education credits in ethics because it's required for lawyers. I would not let one of my oldest friends buy me a cup of coffee because he was presenting in front of one of our contested hearings. I am not taking any campaign contributions. I did pay for this one. I printed this myself. I did print for this one. Paid for these buttons. I think if I don't count the money that I had to give the Vermont Democratic Party for access to their voter database, I have spent, I don't know, a couple $100. I am not rich enough to to do that. Let's see, what else? Corrupt to cut. Somebody talks to me about how am I going to deal with the other side. They talk, I will listen. They negotiate, I will negotiate. Thank you.
I think a lot about this issue of crossing the divide, crossing boundaries. And I'm going to tell you a story. When I turned 50, I was telling Will back here, when I turned 50, I decided, which was just in May, that I was going to start doing all the things that I wanted to do. And one was play trumpet, and the other was to buy a motorcycle. And I signed up for a motorcycle class in Dummerston, and I was one of only 2 women in the room. It was mostly young men in their 20s. And I hadn't really thought about that part of it. And they were razzing me a lot of the time. They figured I was a Democrat. They didn't know I was in the legislature. And then they found I was in the legislature. And then they found out I was the majority leader. And they thought that was hilarious that I was there taking that class with them. And I mention it because that same week I was preparing for a talk I was giving at the Tiny House Fest in Brattleboro. And you couldn't really come up with 2 different groups of people than the folks that were going to be at the Tiny House Fest and the folks that were at this motorcycle course. And in the days leading up to the event at Tiny House Fest, I had this dream that I had to take my motorcycle, the practical exam on a motorcycle while riding inside a tiny house. And it was this, colliding of worlds. And one of the men that I took the class with, he was one of the instructors, and he said, Becca, I read an article about you before you took this class. And he said, clearly we disagree on so much policy, but I can tell I really like you, and we can talk about these issues. And we spent most of the class talking about policy issues. And I will just say really quickly, we absolutely have to get money out of politics in every possible way. I don't know if you saw the news this morning about the IRS new regulations around dark money. It was giving me angina this morning. Okay.
All right, so our next topic is going to be healthcare. So Wayne, we're going to have you first, then Becca, then Jeanette. How do you feel about Medicare for all for Vermont? Universal health care is the law in Vermont, but is not financed and implemented. Will you work for its full financing and implementation, or work for gradual implementation through partial and half measures like universal primary care?
Well, this makes up for the meatball question I let off with. This is probably an area I know the least about. What I do know is that there is going to be no funding for any kind of service increase, including health care or anything, with a Governor Scott backed and insisted upon no new taxes. So, partial, full, irrelevant. If there is a Republican majority and a Republican governor, which we have now, there's no money. Unless you cut something else. I'm listening for suggestions. I don't have any. In New Zealand, they don't have personal injury health care or anything. They have what we commonly think of as workers' comp. Whether it's a housewife who gets hurt, whether it's a worker who gets hurt, whether they have a job or don't have a job, they're all covered. They get a 65% of our wages if you're disabled. That is a way that health care can be provided. It is also a way that Medicare is provided. It's partial, it's funded by the people who are working now, and for the people who are taking in now and in the future. It's a balancing act. That kind of health care coverage is important because it includes preventative care that is essential to reduce long-term costs. Thank you.
So I do support moving towards universal health care for all. And I was one of the co-sponsors of the universal primary care bill. And we're going to continue to work on that, whether it needs to be an incremental steps towards having that universal care. I do support that. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately is that we were all very disappointed when Governor Shumlin decided that he couldn't make the numbers work financially. And so my spouse is a healthcare attorney. We talk about healthcare a lot and the costs. How do you make it work in a state where our demographics in some ways are upside down in terms of the payers that you need paying into a system? So I've been thinking lately about an idea that was floated at the beginning of this conversation, but hasn't gotten a lot of traction since, but I'd like us to move more towards it, which is how do we fit ourselves into a regional compact around healthcare? We've been told in the past that it can't be done. I'm telling you, I never thought Trump would be elected. Everything is upside down land. Everything that we thought would never happen has happened. We had somebody in Helsinki yesterday, supposedly representing our government, basically saying he trusted Putin's information more than his own. It's all crazy. I feel like we can take another look at this idea of a compact, whether it's a regional compact or with even a few other New England states. We have got to crack this nut. It is crushing Vermonters, the level of debt they have around health care. And I can see you're about to raise that up. So it is, we cannot, thank you for the delay. We cannot crack all these other nuts, all these other problems we want to address unless we address healthcare costs. It's a huge part of our budget.
So I did serve on the healthcare committee for a couple of years, and it was at the time when, before this last attempt at universal health care coverage, we tried it again and couldn't succeed. I do support the universal primary care bill. I also was a co-sponsor, and we will continue to work on that. I also think that there are other steps that we can take, and we're not going to do it all at once. One of the questions was, should we nibble away at it or should we do it all at once? We can't do it all at once. I think that we've been shown that. But we can make steps. We can bend the curve of spending, and we've taken steps to do that already, and we're still working on it. One of the big issues is the pharmaceutical companies, and that is really hard to get around. We don't even have the right to look at our pharmacy benefits manager that deals with the state, that is our state manager for all the pharmacy benefits for our Medicaid people and our state employees. So I had a bill last year that I didn't pursue because we were spending most of our health time on both mental health and on the primary care. And I thought it was a step that might work to start moving us toward universal health care. I propose, and I'm going to introduce it again this year, all publicly paid employees, municipal, state, UVM, VSAC, anybody, this county, anybody that's paid by public dollars, teachers, all be in the same health care plan. If we could do that, we could begin a pool, and we could begin to make that then available to other Vermonters to buy in, and we, I think, could move toward some kind of universal health care that covers every Vermonter. Thank you.
So I just want to pause and remind everyone it's almost 8 o'clock. If you have other questions that you'd like to send up, please do. They can be follow-up questions on some of the topics that we've already covered. This next question, Becca, you're going to go first, then Jeanette, and then Wayne, is our last one, for which we have like several cards on the same topic, and then we have a series of ones that are more like single questions. But please feel free to continue to contribute whatever thoughts and questions you have. So the next topic is diversity and inclusion. What ideas do you have for how Vermont might welcome and support immigrants? What do you guys do for GLBTQ people? What do you think are the most important issues for women in Vermont? Brattleboro will likely be voting on giving 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in town elections, serve as at representative town meetings, and serve on school boards. Will you support state-approved if it passes?
So I am one of several members of the legislature who does identify as LGBTQ. My spouse is a woman, and we have 2 children. And it's been very interesting to be in that role as an out woman.
Just a request
Louder?
to speak louder.
You got it. So I'm gay. And it informs the work that I do. And I was told at a very young age, I got the signals very early, that I was never going to be able to do the things that I wanted to do because I was gay. And so one of those was running for office. In terms of the ways that we support diversity, again, this is a topic I could go on for hours. Both Jeanette and myself have worked very hard on a number of bills related to this issue. But I will just say one that was incredibly important to me was getting the gender-neutral bathroom bill passed. And this was a bill that said single-use bathrooms in public accommodations in Vermont do not need to be labeled male or female. It should be open to all. We had incredibly moving testimony from parents of trans kids, of testimony from non-binary individuals in terms of how they identify with their gender identity. And what they said was they actually had to have an app on their phone to know where was a safe place to use the bathroom in Vermont, because there were so few places where they felt safe and comfortable. Now, kids came up to my committee and gave that testimony. And that's an incredibly moving and powerful situation to have students come up and say, this is my reality, and I need you to help me with this. And I have to say, it was one of the moments where I felt very proud of our governor. He did not make it a cultural issue. He signed it, he invited the community in, and he said, this is a civil rights issue for all in Vermont. And so I am very proud to serve you and to continue working on these issues.
So I think that I'm going to address the issue of women and racism. And I think that the biggest issue facing women in Vermont right now is going to be the defunding of Planned Parenthood. Lots and lots and lots of women depend on Planned Parenthood for their health care. And I think that is going to be a huge issue, and we need to begin to address that. We also, both Becca and I serve on the sexual harassment committee in the State House, where we're looking at our own behaviors and the behaviors of other people in the State House. We this year finally got a bill passed that establishes a panel and an office that's going to look at systemic racism across state government, at all 3 branches of government. And unfortunately, the governor vetoed it because he didn't like the fact that the panel, the independent panel, was going to be able to, was the only one that could fire the officer that was hired. In the end, we caved in a little bit and rewrote the bill and didn't address who could fire the person at all. We never addressed who's going to fire anybody in any other place. So we just left that open, and he did sign it. So we now have an officer that's going to look at, do an inventory of systemic racism in state government and how we're going to address that. Let me just make a comment about the 16, 17-year-old vote in Brattleboro. That is a charter change that they are going to have to do, and then they're going to have to present it to the legislature, and I believe that's why that's why we were asked if we would support it. My feeling in our committee, and we're the committee that deals with that, is that if the voters of a town approved a charter change, even if I didn't like it, I'm not going to second guess those voters. So if they pass it, we will pass it. Or I will, my committee will.
As I've mentioned before, I'm an economist. I had 90 credits or something when I took my first took my first economics course, and it cost me another semester at school because I had none of the prerequisites. What I found was a worldview that matched my worldview. One of the important tenets of economics is efficiency. Stop for a moment. Discrimination is not morally good. It is morally bad. I don't know how anyone could justify otherwise. Beyond that, it is totally economically inefficient. If you need to make something out of wood, then you make it out of wood. You could make a worse one or a heavier one out of a brick, but it's inefficient to do so. If you, my mother's age group, you could be a nurse, you could be a teacher, you could be a homemaker. Which one do you want to be? Well, she was handicapped. She couldn't be a nurse. She probably couldn't be a teacher. She was a homemaker, and she was probably pretty good. I don't know, I only had one, so it's hard to compare. But keeping someone from a position or an occupation that they want to do or good at, it just does not make economic sense. And that I hate to sound like an economist, but I am. The other thing that bothers me is that I am an old white man. I am not a woman. I am not gay. And I've been told by women that they will not vote for me because I am a man. I am still trying to wrestle with that logic. Thank you.
So we have time for 2 more questions before we give you 3 minutes each for your closing statements, and we have a bunch more cards. So I think what I'm going to do is I've just picked 2 questions to be our final 2 questions, but then before your closing statements, I'm just going to read the rest of the cards so that you have a full knowledge of what's on people's minds in the room. So if you have any more cards, again, this is the time to pass them up. And then we'll have some time for mingling and one-on-one conversation. So Jeanette, you're going to go first on this next question, then
I guess I am.
Wayne, and then Becca. So here's the question. How do you propose to encourage young people to stay here, to find jobs for them so they can afford life here?
Well, I think that there are young people moving back in, and I think we need to encourage people to stay. I actually would encourage kids who've grown up in Vermont to leave Vermont for a while, to see the world, and then to come back. So I don't think there's anything wrong with leaving. It's the not coming back that I have a problem with. And my daughter lives in Montana, so. But I think there are some things that we need to do. We need to have some better, more affordable housing for young people to start. Their beginning housing is dreadful here. You can't afford it. We need to have better child care. We need to have jobs. And I think we need to encourage entrepreneurship. A lot of young people don't want to have a job that they feel like is a dead-end job and they've got to stay there. And we can solve that a bit by having universal health care so that they don't have to depend on their employer for their health care. They can go out and start a business. We have, just in Bellows Falls here, you can see the young people and the older people starting new businesses and new jobs. And I think that's important. So there are a lot of things that we can do. Those are some of them. We probably need to have better broadband coverage. I don't think it's bad here. But when you go in the other end of the county over there, it's pretty dreadful. And so we need to solve that issue so that they can come. We just did pass what's called a remote workers bill that is going to encourage people who now live in Boston, but they could do their job from anywhere. They could come to Vermont and do their job. And we're going to give them a loan, a grant, some incentives to come to Vermont and do their job here. Have a family, or not have a family, but live here and become a Vermonter. Thank you.
This is probably one of the most important reasons I am running at all. My my 3 adult children, one's going to graduate school, would not move to Vermont because there is no high-speed broadband in most of the state. We have worse internet connection to the world than they have in Nairobi, Africa. We are a third world internet area. This is my cell phone. It's also my campaign manager. I don't like to say this. My 9-year-old grandson has a cell phone either because my daughter's crazy or because every other kid in his class has a cell phone. She raises her own kids. I was the last person in my family to get a cell phone. My wife would call me from the end of the street on the home phone and say, "I'm at the end of the street, I'm coming home." It took all my strength not to just hang up on her. What do I need that for? Well, now that I have one, I am not getting rid of it. And Vermont can't do something about that. When it needed a railroad, it drilled a hole right through the mountain, and we got a railroad, and that was 150 years. If somebody says, "We're too hilly, we're too valley, we can't get cell phone," you can get anything you want if you want it. No new taxes? Oh, we can't get anything. But I won't harp on that any longer. All right, thank you.
So the answer, obviously, is very multi-pronged, but I like to think of it in 2 silos, one being that of policy and the other being that of attitude. And so we passed a very large, comparatively for the state of Vermont, a large housing bond this session, $35 million, which will be parlayed into about $100 million to invest in affordable housing across the state. We know we have a housing shortage. We want to bring people here. We don't have the housing for them. We passed a minimum wage increase. We passed family medical leave insurance. Last session we passed sick leave, paid sick leave. So we are trying to craft a suite, of a package deal essentially to say to young people, we value you. We want you to come and bring your families here. We want you to invest in Vermont, so we're investing in you. Unfortunately, some of those bills were vetoed by the governor, but we will take another run at them, whether it's this upcoming biennium or if we regroup for the following, depending on what happens in the governor's office. But we're going to continue on the policy front to try to make it a place where young people want to be. We talked about internet coverage. One thing that I want you to think about is we talk about our aging demographics in Vermont. About 20% of seniors are not online. It is not a priority for them. For millennial Vermonters, only about 1% are not online. And for Gen Xers, it's only about 7% not online. So that shapes the conversation in the State House in terms of what the priority is at a given time, okay? So it could go in a lot of different directions. I will say this. I was recently at a meeting in Putney in which people were bemoaning the fact that young people, from their perspective, were not involved. Why aren't they serving on the boards? Why aren't they serving on all these committees that we need them to have? And I said, 1, have you asked them? And 2, do you understand they're working 3 jobs and they have no child care, so they can't be there? Thank you.
Yet another topic we could go on about for hours. So again, this will be the last question, but I will read the rest of the questions before you do your closing statement. So Wayne, you're going to go first, and then Becca, and then Jeanette. And I just thought this would be a nice place to end our formal period of presenting questions to you. What gives you hope about the long-term future of Vermont?
I get asked, I moved here full-time in 2011 when I retired from the state of Connecticut, and I get asked all the time, why? Why did you move to Vermont? Well, it's not the lowest tax state that I could have moved to. Might be equivalent to the taxes in Connecticut, but it is a beautiful state. And I am still finding, after all these years, I'm finding it hard to articulate why I like Vermont. I say you have to go to a select board meeting where two people are arguing with each other and then they go have coffee and cake afterwards, and the cake is really good. To go to the representative town meeting, which I am in Brattleboro, and hear the different factions. I never heard any of that in Connecticut. Politics was none of your business in Connecticut. You did what you were told. That's my hope, that we can keep things many things the way we are. Not consolidate power and resources in Montpelier and Burlington. Go to Burlington, it's like the Emerald City, Wizard of Oz. They have 4 bars on their cell phone. Nobody is taking a $10,000 gift to move to most of Windham County, where there are no cell phone work from home opportunities at all. I didn't go on Facebook until February. I'm old. Maybe if Facebook and cell service were available, all the older people who aren't on the internet might actually go on the internet. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The lack of internet access or the fact that they were old? Thank you.
So simply put, my neighbors give me hope. And it's really fun because one of my neighbors is here. Deb Whitkus is one of my neighbors. And in the evenings, I take my dog out around the neighborhood, and I get to have conversations with people about the opioid crisis or about the fact that we have a housing shortage in Brattleboro. And I can do all that because people are still willing to be on their steps and on their porches and engaging with each other. There's this old Janice Ian song that I've been thinking about lately. The refrain is, the heart of every town is the people that you know, and they'll always call you home. And I think about that all the time. When I am despondent, and believe me, it is easy to get despondent, I take my dog and I go out in my neighborhood, and inevitably I run into somebody in my neighborhood and we have a conversation that moves my thinking about something. And I was thinking the other day, my wife came out into the yard, and our neighbors, I'm trying to figure out how to say this in the time, I shouldn't think about the time. So our neighbors want to have an enclosure so their young child doesn't run into the road, okay? And in order for them to have an enclosure, they needed to build a fence on our property. And so, which was fine, because over time it has stopped being our property. It's our property together. They play on our swing set. I borrow their mower. They use my hedge clippers. We rake each other's roofs together. And so it is this really a neighborhood of people that are trying to find connection. And as long as we are finding connection, I will have hope in this state. And the state is people-sized. We can get things done here that other states can't because of those interactions.
So I have hope because I think that some of the same reasons that Becca just mentioned, that people stop me in the grocery store and ask me all kinds of questions. We call it the frozen pea aisle. And people want to know what's going on. They stop me in the grocery store. They stop everybody. They stop Becca, they stop Mike. My 4th grade neighbor is so excited because somebody who was in the State House when she went there on a tour lives next to her and plays kickball with her. She's very excited about that. So I think that we respectfully value our differences. And I think that is what makes us different and special. I'm not sure that that isn't true everywhere, but I see it here, that we respectfully value our differences. And most of what we do is the difference in our individual lives and our community lives. And I would like to read, if I might, we have to ask for permission to read in the Senate, so I'm sorry, I don't have to ask for
you were asking.
I don't have to ask for your permission. A quote by Dorothy Canfield Fisher from 1953, and this is on one of the plaques in the State House. The Vermont tradition grapples energetically with the basic problem of human conduct, how to reconcile the needs of the group, of which every man or woman is a member, with the craving for individual freedom to be what he really is. And I think that respectful balancing and grappling with that is what makes us hopeful that we will continue our traditions and remain the state that we are. Thank you. What did he say?
It almost makes us Canadian.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, sure, you bet.
We have 10 more cards. So if you want to take a stretch break while I'm reading these, feel free, and then we'll have closing statements. So why don't we just go Jeanette, Wayne, Becca for our closing statements?
Sure.
Public transportation. Is it possible to create a rural, digitally linked, effective public transportation option that will link Hill residents to villages and towns, that will give employment and free folks from the necessity of owning a car? Will you comment brain power, money to developing this? What's the solution to the opioid crisis? As a military retiree, I am concerned about how our VA benefits are being continually eroded. I was always told by my father that my medical needs would always be taken care of if I retired from the Army. I am now paying a monthly fee and paying higher and higher co-pays. Why is the retiree community being taxed this way? Also, why do I pay income tax federal on my retired pay? How can we control Bellows Falls being used as a dumping ground for social service housing, drug rehab, re-entry programs, etc.? Large impact on neighborhoods, schools, policing, etc. What can we do to stop sending Vermonters convicted of crimes to out-of-state prisons? Also, how to reduce incarceration in general and recidivism. What is your point on the legalization of marijuana? How can Vermont border towns compete better with stores in New Hampshire? What is your position on expanded recreational marijuana legalization? What do you feel about Bernie and the Democrats? Do you think Friends for Change should go nationwide?
What?
Yes.
Friends for Change.
Agriculture is 30% of Vermont's economy and foundation of our culture, but it's struggling. How do we help agriculture? So a really wide range of excellent questions that we did not get to. I'm sure we wish that we had enough time to do them all, but I now present you with the daunting task of 3 minutes. Did you want to add one more
Yeah, I
question?
showed up late, so I didn't know that if there was a way to do
Oh,
that.
question card, sure, please.
So I just have one question, which is, do any of you personally know a heroin addict? Of any of you? Can any of you say,
Yes.
and how much time do you spend talking with these people? Like, do you sit down with them?
What's the question?
Do you share? Do you
He wants to
think
know
that
if
you
we
know?
know,
Do you ever get to
Well,
really
we
know where they
can't,
came
wait, he
from?
can't answer, they
So,
can't answer your
right,
question.
so they're not
Somebody
gonna
else.
answer this question, we're just
We can
entering
talk
it
over
What
into
was
this.
the question?
Was whether any of you know an addict, was that the word?
Heroin.
Yeah,
An
heroin
heroin
addict,
addict.
heroin.
Yeah, so it was another opioid question, so thank you. So again, just to
Thank you.
summarize, we now are gonna give each candidate 3 minutes for a closing statement and the daunting task of what you wanna present in that after this rich array of questions.
Well, I would say, first of all, if there's going to be a forum in Brattleboro next Wednesday night, next Thursday night, and you can come and ask your question there if it didn't get answered here. I will say that it has been, over these 16 years, a real honor to serve Windham County and the state of Vermont. And I say that humbly because the longer I serve, the more opportunity I have to make people angry at me. And I'm sure that I have made everybody in this room angry at me at least once on at least one issue, if not more. So the fact that most of you continue to have faith in my overall judgment is an honor to me, and I hope to continue to serve. I love the experience of respectfully listening to many sides of an issue and trying to bring them together to come to the solution that is the best for Vermont and Vermonters. And civil discourse is a very, very important thing. And across the country, we see that being lost. I'm going to give you an example of bridging the divide. When Doobie was lieutenant governor, a Republican House member and I were having a battle on the floor over an issue. And we really violently disagreed with each other, and we were being pretty respectful about it. But when we left, I heard that Lieutenant Governor Doobie was angry because I had somehow insulted him, or we'd made enemies of each other. And I went in and I said, Brian, do you know what Kevin and I did after we got off the floor? And he said, what did you do? And I said, well, we went and had lunch together. And he said, you did? And I said, yes, that's the way we operate here. And so that civil, respectful discourse, I think, is very, very important, and we need to continue that. I love this job. I love serving Windham County and the state of Vermont, and I hope to continue. Thank you.
Let's see if I can hit these questions quick. Transportation. I studied economic development in Fordham University, flexible bus systems where they can move the routes around where the people are and where the jobs are is the least subsidized form of transportation, and that should be expanded. The opioid solution is, I'm going to say, maybe intractable for the current generation of opioid users. Nobody wants to hear that because they already know someone and they're worried about them going to die. We should focus on the next generation of opioid users that are developing right now in the dysfunctional households and the lack of early childhood child care and affordable child care. Not the most popular solution. I benefited from the GI Bill. I am a veteran from the Vietnam era. I learned how that makes a difference. I've never met a veteran that didn't deserve what they got, and anyone who doesn't treat them right or give them the resources they need should go in one of the out-of-state prisons that I don't support. It is the prison industrial complex, and that goes back to the Judiciary Committee to review the sentence guidelines and that give discretion back to judges instead of making mandatory sentences. Marijuana should be legal, yes, and tax it. Bernie, who doesn't love Bernie? Agriculture, we need to worry about the acid rain that's coming in from Ohio, from the coal plants, because that is decimating our forests and making our ground more acid, requiring more fertilizer, more lime, and that is really important. I am against the consolidation of power in Montpelier and Burlington. They have 5,000 state employees up there, putting $319 million into that area's economy. We have 236 state employees in Windham County. They put 1/29th of that amount of money in Windham County. We could bash Trump with the rest of you, but I really have no control over what he does, even if I were in the legislature. I broke my femur in a motorcycle. I don't ride anymore. If we covered the state of Vermont with solar panels over every square inch, including the lakes and rivers and everything else, we would produce approximately 640 megawatts, which is the size of Vermont Yankee. There are unfortunately 25 nuclear plant equivalents serving New England now. It is not a solution. An adequate solution. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. It's been an honor to serve you for the last 2 sessions. I believe that I am doing the work that I was called to do at a very young age. When I was 17, a news reporter asked me after I won an award in my high school, what did I think I was going to do with my life? I said, I think that I'm going to teach, and I'm going to write, and someday run for office. And I did teach. I taught history for a long time, and I still write a weekly op-ed in the Reformer. And running for office was the fulfillment of this last of my high school goals. Now, what I also said was, whatever I do, whatever the avenue is, I'm going to work to improve people's lives. I believe it was shaped by my family's experience. My dad lost his family in the Holocaust, and that has ridden my family our entire lives. And I was reminded of it when I moved from one part of Brattleboro to another. My dad came to help me move. And the postal worker greeted me and said, "Oh, Becca, you moved from 53 Green Street and now you're at 271 South Main Street." And I was charmed by this. And my dad was terrified. He said, "These people know too much about your lives. I don't feel safe with you in such a small town where everybody knows your business." I've had to work with him for years to understand that despite his worries about the way that politicians become lightning rods for so much anger, that I'm called to do this work. And I'm so proud of the work that we've done for the last 2 bienniums that I've been in around consumer protections, civil rights, protections in the workplace against sexual harassment, expanded housing. I'm on a think tank trying to crack this nut of affordable childcare. Certainly continuing to look at economic development issues here in Windham County, and our mental health crisis. And so I just want to be clear, the mental health crisis and the opioid crisis are not nested in one particular community or one socioeconomic strata. It is cutting across all families. It's cutting across all regions of this state and all pockets of this county. It's wrapped up in poverty, but it is not because of poverty. And we need to put aside our stereotypes about what it is to suffer from mental health issues, what it is to suffer from addiction, and we need to stop othering each other. That is the only way that we are going to get out of this mess in Vermont. Thank you.
So we have about 30 minutes now for refreshments and for mingling, an opportunity for you to talk with any of the candidates one-on-one a little further. But I first want to thank you for your wonderful questions and for coming out tonight.